2005 Honda Odyssey air conditioning. This is a dual evaporator unit. It has the air conditioning in the back with the evaporator in the rear corner panel and the ducts coming down in the back. So always remember, when you do your test, make sure the rear air conditioning is on and the vents are actually open. Always check your air cleaner, which this one was dirty, and it's not super dirty, but dirty. You don't want any air restriction. It did have dye in it, but it was a really poor, I could see it with my eyes when I removed the cap. It was missing the low side cap, and the high side cap was really tweaked down really tight, and that always tells me somebody's playing in there that shouldn't be playing on the system, because one, you don't torque them down tight, and they lost the low side cap. So refrigerant is pure refrigerant. It's not contaminated. That's a good thing. Most likely I'm jumping to conclusion we're low. But if we're low, why are we 150, or why are we 50 psi on the high side? Because aren't we told that when you're low, your low side will be lower? And we're 130 on the high side. I did my visual. I went around there, whatever UV dye they use. Now this is a problem when shops just don't know, or they're intentionally cheap and they try to buy the cheapest thing. The dye they use doesn't fluoresce with any wavelength light I use, so it's a really weak, poor quality dye that none of my UV lights can fluoresce with any usefulness. So that's one problem right there. So now I have to go over, and I'm going to go over the entire vehicle using the refrigerant leak detectors. And it was just out on a test drive because the mechanics here were performing other services on the vehicle. So now I just wanted to show you a before and after. Once I go over this vehicle, if I don't find any obvious leak with the leak detectors, definitely not going to find it with the UV dye, because the person who injected whatever type of dye they had before, most likely what I find is that a lot of technicians will get this one particular dye that would come from the big auto stores, the big franchises, came in a clear bottle. And Super Cool was one of the companies, and there was another company. It was a clear plastic bottle. It said UV dye oil, but that word oil is your trigger point right there. That tells you it is actually an oil that has UV dye in it, but it's already pre-diluted for the amount of dye for every ounce of oil. It's not a concentrated dye that goes in the entire system. So shops would use this UV dye enhanced oil that was only meant to do a 100% change out of the oil. Like if you had a burnt out system, you would use this oil because it already contained a UV dye that was diluted down to the quantity needed for that amount of oil. But if you put 1 ounce of this oil into a car, it would be over diluted out with the rest of the oil in the system, because it was never meant as a concentrate to add an enhancer UV dye to the rest of the oil. And that was usually what I just found right now, because what was in there wasn't doing its job. So I'm going to recover this refrigerant. I may make a video of the quantity of refrigerant to show you how much refrigerant comes out of this 2005 Honda Odyssey, and compare that quantity of refrigerant that comes out with this high side this low side high pressure. And is this because I have a refrigerant charge problem, or is this because I have a expansion valve stuck wide open? If you have a front or rear expansion valve stuck wide open, you'll get a scenario like this too. Maybe I have a displacement. What was this? Shoot, I can't remember. And I'm gonna have to get down there and look and see. Is it a variable displacement compressor? That swash plate is stuck in the minimum position and it's just wobbling a little bit, giving you minimum displacement, and I have this pressure. So you have variables going on here. All right, let's get back to the next procedure. Kill the camera. See you on the next one. And I do notice my crack growing a little bit on my screen. Okay, all right, see ya.